That said, let's get into the presentation. All right, folks, so this is the Difficult Person's Survival Kit. And the first question that I like to always begin with when I'm doing a presentation is like, why should you care about this stuff, right? If you have someone who's a pain in the butt or difficult or hard to deal with, you know, you may just want to get them out of your life, do a friend cleanse. Some people in business call it the velvet rope strategy, where you dump the duds and you get rid of your worst clients and you move on. So this is not for those people. These are for the people that you have to deal with. And of course, it's very timely that I'm doing this presentation in October, because many of us are going to see family members, relatives, at Thanksgiving and upcoming very soon here. So it'll be useful for that. And then many of us still need to go to work and interact with people, or interact with customers at least, that are really challenging to deal with on a daily basis. So as many of you know, I am a trainer in neurolinguistic programming. I've been doing this full-time since 2002. I was in mental health for a decade before that. So a lot of the new material that I present, particularly in the influence course, is things that I have modeled using neurolinguistic programming over the last 23 years and extracting models of behavior moves that work really well to produce a very specific result. If you study neurolinguistic programming, you will become very disciplined at noticing kind of patterns in human behavior, the structure of how people make decisions, the structure of how people get influenced, the structure of how people get stressed, what to do with that, how to work with that, etc. You'll get into patterns. And so I've spent a lot of years studying everything I can about influence, about human behavior, and patterns. And that is one of the things that brings me a lot of joy, to be able to share that with you. Let's start with, though, why do we care about handling these people well? And here's why. Okay. And normally in the course, I talk about this thing called the art of decontamination. The art of decontamination is the art of delivering challenging news and not having it stick to you, receiving challenging news while still being able to maintain the relationship and keeping yourself or keeping the other person resourceful so you can actually communicate, and what to do when you kind of get contaminated. So some of what we're doing here is designed to reduce the contamination that naturally can happen in interactions with other people. So there are 3 hard truths about being the messenger. So if you have to lead people, influence them, give them corrective feedback, there are 3 hard truths that I really believe are true. And if you're aware of it, you can artfully work with it and reduce the issues between you and another person, whether it's a personal relationship, a romantic relationship, or a professional relationship, to preserve that relationship with them. The first one is that the messenger always gets shot. Always, in my opinion. What I mean by that is that when you deliver challenging news to somebody, they will associate those negative feelings they're feeling in their nervous system and in their body with the person in front of them. So if you're the messenger and you have to go announce to the colonel that, the troops have just lost the battle and the war's been taken over, when they are experiencing this flood of emotion, you are right there in their face and it gets stuck to you. And so they will avoid you in the future. And here's what's crazy about this, folks. This is the power of association. And in NLP, we call it anchoring, where we connect a unique stimulus with a particular response. I'll give you a real example of this that's kind of crazy, because this happens even when the person consciously knows that you're a good person, even when they consciously know you did nothing wrong. Even when, if you ask them what they think about you, they would honestly answer, Scott's a great guy, I love him. And yet they will still have that negative feeling and avoid you in the future. Here's the example. One of my clients was a funeral director. Now think about this for a minute. What's generally the first thing that happens when you see a funeral director, right? They either hug you or they pat you on the shoulder and say, I'm so sorry for your loss. And they're looking you right deeply in the eyes. And now that grief and that pain and that sorrow you're experiencing is now intimately connected with their face. And so I asked this client, I said, I'm curious. I said, you live in the same community you work in, right? And she goes, yeah. And I said, I'm curious, how often do you see people who you've performed a service for one of their family members? She goes, oh, all the time. I said, okay. I said, how often do they come up and say hi? And she goes, almost never. Almost never. Now, if you ask these people about her, hey, what do you think of, so-and-so? They would have said, oh my God, she's so wonderful. She's so nice. She's so loving. She took such great care of Auntie M when she passed away last year. But folks, we are emotional beings. We are driven by emotion. Emotion wins out. All decisions are based on emotion, and then they're justified with logic after the fact. So if something makes us feel bad, our natural tendency is to avoid it. We have three primary biological drives, and I'm not going to go too deep into this, but we have three of them. And they are to avoid pain or what we perceive as painful. So it could be physical or it could be some awful news or something we perceive as painful. Like some people see a letter from the IRS and feel pain, and it's just a piece of mail, right? But that'll work for a lot of people, right? We also chase what is desirable or what feels good. So we avoid pain and we seek pleasure or what we perceive as pleasurable. And then we also tend to want to conserve energy, which is often looks like lazy behavior or taking the easy way out. We always want the easy way out. Now, as we get older and more mature, we realize a lot of those things we thought were shortcuts when we were kids were actually the long road. And so we mature through that and we appreciate the effort and the struggle. But we're always going to avoid pain, seek pleasure, and take the easy way out. And so what that means is, just in terms of basic behavioral psychology, if something feels bad, you're going to try and avoid it. And if something feels good, you're going to want to try and do it. So like one of the toughest issues people have with getting themselves to do new habits is what we call this motivational threshold. And so if you set your goal too big, which is the most common mistake people make when they're trying to install a new habit, is they set their goal too big, and now it requires more motivation to actually execute that goal. Like I said, I was going to, jog 3 miles 5 times a week. And the minute they're tired and exhausted and they've had a long day and they're depleted, they don't have enough willpower battery left over to go ahead and get that done. And so one of the best hacks you can do if you're installing a new habit is to lower that threshold and start with what we call a 2-minute seed habit. It's a great way to get momentum and to get things going. And so if you just know the basics of how this biology works, we can leverage it and suddenly take things we want to do, and we're going to relate this to relationships here just in a minute, and make it a lot easier. So we're not fighting ourselves all the time. And the reason I'm using this as kind of an opening metaphor and example is because a lot of people will set goals that are not well formed about things like exercise or diet. And then the problem with that is they have a hard time following through, which is to be expected because of how they set it up. But what do they do with that experience? They tell themselves a story and they use it to reinforce an unwanted identity or a limiting belief about themselves. See, I knew I didn't have any willpower. I knew I'd fail. I can't do anything right. And then they use that to pull themselves down into a deeper hole. So the huge benefit in starting to understand just some basic biology of how this stuff works is you can leverage it and get better results. Okay, so let's go back to this presentation here and let's start with the first technique. So this is basically how to give feedback without being the villain, folks. Okay, how many people here have received feedback from someone else and it didn't feel good? Raise your hand if you've been that. Okay, does anyone want to share like a really quick short example? I've got one. Back in college, I worked at the United States Naval Station for a very brief period of time. And the boss put his desk right by the door of the building. So when you came in, you had to walk by him and his desk. And when we would walk in, if we were even a minute late, he'd look at us and go, "You're late again." And he'd make us feel pretty horrible. And then he would often follow up with, "What's wrong with you?" And so he was making it about us. He was making it about our identities, making us feel pretty bad. Anyone else have an experience like that? Or you get some feedback, doesn't feel too good? All right. So this first one's called the CARE method. And CARE stands for connect, ask, reflect, and empower. That's what it stands for. Okay? And what this does is this integrates a couple of concepts. One is what's called psychological safety. This is by Amy Edmondson. Another one's called mirror neuron theory, which is the idea that, we tend to reflect back what we see, and motivational interviewing principles. And I, don't have time to go into all these things now, but this is just to give you an idea of where this stuff comes from. And the first step in this one is connect. So one of the things we want to do when we're first starting to give, so this would be if you have to give someone corrective feedback. Let's say that someone at work is not doing their job and you've got to talk to them in a way, and you want to do it in a way where you maintain that relationship and you don't muddy it up. So you want to begin with shared goals and appreciation. What this does is it activates the brain's social bonding systems and this oxytocin response. Oxytocin is that drug that gets released when you have a baby, and it causes you to bond and feel this sense of safety and wellness and these other things. So we want to start by connecting first. And I'll give you an example of this. That would be, so for example, you'd say, you and I both want this project to succeed, and I really appreciate your dedication. So you start off with that. In NLP, we call this pacing. We want to pace the client or the person we're giving the feedback to before we lead. We want to build what we call rapport with them ahead of time. So you want to start with connecting first, okay? Focus on those shared goals and some appreciation. How many people have heard of what's called the feedback sandwich? Where you give someone some appreciation, then you give them the corrective feedback, right? Then you give them some more appreciation. And when I teach this, a lot of times I'll hear from usually at least one person in the room like, yeah, we tried feedback sandwich at our office and it didn't work. Feedback sandwich, in my experience, always works when it's done authentically and genuinely. If you do it with false praise, or if you do it inauthentically, it will absolutely bomb. And if you do it with what we call a competency-based person, they will hate your guts and you'll have an enemy at work. So it's really important that when you do that and when you connect, if you're going to give someone an affirmation, that you do it genuinely, or I would say don't do it at all and find some other common ground. Like, hey, I know we both want the company to be successful because the company pays our salaries. And so we have that at least in common, if nothing else. So we want to connect first. Second step is we want to ask permission. Here we're going to invite feedback participation to preserve autonomy and lower defensiveness. And so we're actually going to ask them for permission. We're going to ask them if it would be okay if we give them some feedback. And this psychologically does a couple different things. So we're going to ask them, would you be open to some feedback that could help us improve our results? Most people will say yes. Okay. Now, if any of you are wondering, what do we do if they say no? The answer is go on to the lava technique, which I'm going to teach you next, which is how to neutralize someone who's angry and pissed off. Because if they say no, that they're not open to feedback, chances are you've got someone who's pretty angry on your hands. But most people will be open to this, okay? And I know that there was some questions about that. What if they still get defensive when I use this technique? Well, that's normal. In the first few seconds, they might be a little defensive, but if you stay calm, pause, and return to connection, they'll tend to start to match you. And some people also get concerned that when you ask permission that you're weakening your authority. And what the science shows is that that's not true. It actually strengthens the connection between you and the person. So just in case that's coming up for anybody. Okay, the next thing we want to do is reflect. And here's the important thing. We're reflecting on the impact. Now, the way I taught this in How to Read Lead before is we focus on the behavior being the problem, not the person being the problem. There is a huge difference between the two. Okay? If I say to you, hey, folks, listen, I made a new recipe for my boys last night and they hated it, which does happen from time to time, okay? And they hated it. Notice the difference between if I say, you know what, that recipe is not going to be in the cookbook. That recipe is a fail. I'm chucking it. I'm going to throw it out. Notice how intense that feels compared to if I say, hey, folks, tried a new recipe with the boys last night. They hated it. You know, I feel like I can't do anything right. I failed as a chef, and I think I'm failing as a father too. Now I'm making it about my identity. And so remember, if the nervous system of the person you're communicating with gets defensive, their nervous system will go sympathetic and close up, and you won't be able to communicate with them at all. And so part of what we're doing here with the care technique is our goal is to keep their nervous system open so they can actually receive the information. So that's why we want to make sure we're reflecting on the impact, not the character. So we want to focus on what happened and its effect, not the personality, not the person. We don't want to make it about them. We want to make it about the behavior. Okay? So, example here would be when the report went out late, it caused the team to scramble last minute. Notice that's very different than saying you caused the team to scramble last minute, or you cost the team the game, or you cost the team the sale. If you make it about their identity, their nervous system's going to close up. And then what's going to happen is the person that you're communicating with not only is not going to hear you, but they're probably not going to change either. And now out of self-preservation, they're going to want to devalue you or devalue the company or leave or do something else, but it's not going to move it in a positive direction. Okay? And then the E stands for empower ownership. And here what we want to do is we want to ask for their view and co-create solutions. So here we're going to ask them, and we're going to basically say, hey, look, you know, how do you see it? What might make this smoother next time? Okay? What might make this smoother next time? What do you think we should do about that? So if I say, you know, hey, Trisha, you know, I noticed that lately you and I both want the company to succeed. And, you know, I appreciate your dedication to the company. I know you work really hard. I know you stay late a lot of times. Would it be okay if I gave you some feedback that was shared with me at the office? And if she says yes, I might say, hey, you know, one of the concerns that came up was this idea of being at work on time early in the morning, even when we're working late, because the office opens at 9, the phones start ringing. And I know that that's something that was really brought up as important to the company. And I'm wondering what we can do about that. And if you have some ideas of how we can make sure there's always someone there to answer the phones at 9 in the morning. So it's going to make them a little bit less defensive. Any questions, folks, about the care feedback model before we go on to the next one? Okay, if you have questions, you can put in the chat, or you can try to do my best to monitor the chat. Now let's talk about why this works. Why this works. Number one, it reinforces autonomy, competence, and relatedness, which is self-determination theory, and also bypasses defensiveness and helps to engage the prefrontal cortex where logic and reason can prevail. And it also helps to keep them open to dialogue and sustain trust as well. So there's your care technique. Now, I will say this, in the course, we also go into a lot more depth about how to behaviorally. So this is like the script that you would use verbally to do this, but there are also behavioral moves that I would also be teaching you on how to deliver information in a way where you're maintaining what we call this yummy state with you. So if you are working in a company, I often think of there's two types of positions you can have in your company. You can be a spoke or you can be a hub. I want to be a hub because the wheel cannot live without the hub. The wheel needs the hub. The hub ain't going anywhere, but any wheel can live without a spoke here and there. So we want to try and be the hub. So there's a number of behavioral things that we can do as well to make sure that we're maintaining connection and we're keeping the associations with us very, what we call yummy and very desirable. So one of them is pick your, what we call yummy zones. So at work, your cubicle, your office, the place where you want people to come and give you information, you want to keep that yummy and not give corrective feedback in those places. For those of you at home with your loved ones, okay, think of what your yummy zones are. Probably the bedroom, probably the dining room table, probably that place on the couch where you snuggle up and watch a movie. If you do that, these are yummy zones. These are not places I would recommend you give corrective feedback to one another. Does that make sense? Okay. And if you start to be a little bit strategic about it and you understand how this association works, you realize, well, at the office, a conference room is often a great place to go and give corrective feedback. Why? Because a lot of different things happen in a conference room. Birthdays, team meetings, lunches, people stretching, doing yoga and Tai Chi on the break. I mean, there's all kinds of things happening there. So it's a great place to lose a yucky association. The other thing too, folks, is notice the difference, right? If I'm giving you good news and I'm looking you right in the face, it's going to stick to my face. So if I give you a present, do you think it would be better to give it to you in person? Right? You betcha. Right? Because that's going to fire off a strong positive feeling in your nervous system. And if you're looking at me when I hand it to you, that good feeling is more likely to stick to me. And so when we're teaching art of decontamination, some of the moves we do is we'll anchor the problem to an inanimate object. And I don't have time to go into that in detail right now, but I'll just say this. So for example, if I'm doing and going over a performance review, so let's say, Eduardo, I'm going to go over your performance review. I might start off doing the connection part of care with you. I'm connecting, I'm looking you right in the eye. Hey, great to see you. I appreciate your contribution with the company. I know it's really late where you're at, and I appreciate you staying up and being here today and working with us and doing all this. And there was a few things that were brought to my attention. And now notice when I turn and I'm now focused on this piece of paper, I can put the bad news on the paper and leave it there. I can anchor it to this. I can say, these three things came up in your performance review, and the company asked me to discuss this with you. Do you think you can help me out with that? So I'm still doing the moves, but I'm behaviorally anchoring it to this space. And then when I'm done, I can go, you know, once you say, yeah, we can help you out with that, Robert, I go, cool, great. Let's go and get rid of that. Now, how about you and I go get a cup of coffee? And so what I'm able to do, folks, is I'm able to displace that potentially unpalatable news onto an inanimate object that I can make go away. If I have to do it in a conference room, I will always have the person meet me in the conference room. So when I worked with New Meta, every now and then, Ammon would say, you need to get Sonia on track. And so I would call up Sonia and I say, hey, can you meet me in the conference room? And I'd always wait for her to sit down first. Why? So I could sit next to her, not across from her. So I could sit right next to her. So like she and I were on the same team. And then I would put the feedback on the whiteboard up on the wall. And I'd sit there with her sitting next to me, shoulder to shoulder, looking up at the wall. And when I was connecting and giving her compliments, I would do it face to face. And then when I was talking about the feedback, I would look at the wall. And if I'm looking at the wall and pointing to the wall, she will not be looking at me. She will be looking at the wall. And so that association gets stuck there. Okay, so there's a number of behavioral things that we do with these moves as well, folks, that make a huge difference. Okay, does that make sense? Okay, so that's also something that we'd be kind of coaching you to do. All right, so let's move on. Let's move on and teach you the lava technique here as well. So for this one, what would make this really fun is if someone here can channel. So does someone here have someone they're really upset with and pissed off with? Does anyone here have someone they're mad with? You can play with me, and I will be the person. You can take it all out on me. You can vent on me. You can let me have it. Because what I want to show you all real time is how easily we can diffuse the anger that a person is in. This technique that I'm going to show you next works when the complaint is real, or if the complaint is absolutely bonkers and totally out there and totally unrealistic, it will still work without you compromising your integrity a single bit. And LAVA stands for listen, acknowledge, validate, and ask forward. Okay? All right, I lost my big lava page there with my thing. Okay, let's see here. Oh, there it is. Okay, so this is where we should have started. But okay, LAVA integrates emotional regulation neuroscience and crisis negotiation for those of you who care about all this stuff, to basically calm emotional escalation. So we're basically using kind of, when people are talking people off a ledge, some of the same tactics. Okay. So this is the lava technique. Okay. Now we're going to listen, we're going to acknowledge, we're going to validate, and we're going to ask forward. So is anyone willing to play along with me here and pretend I'm someone that you're mad at? I would love to have someone who, and I don't believe for a minute here that people here do not have someone they're mad at somewhere. You don't have to use their real name. Vicky, will you play with me on this one? Thank you. Okay. Okay. So go ahead and, Vicky, I'm going to go ahead and pin you, and then I'm going to go ahead and pin me as well. And the first thing we're going to do here, folks, is the L in lava is listen. So the very first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to listen. I'm going to maintain calm body language and presence, and I'm going to listen to whatever the complaint is. I'm going to let her get it out, and I'm going to let her vent until she's done. And then I want you to notice what I do with it, okay, to de-escalate it. So Vicky, do your best to try and channel some anger there, and then when you're ready, let me have it.
Okay. All right. So I just absolutely cannot believe that you just basically ignored me. You acted as though what I said wasn't important, and just basically talked over me. I don't understand how you can do that. I am so pissed off at you, I'd just like to smack you. Don't do it again. And you do it a lot. So don't do it again.
Okay. So Vicky, if I hear you correctly, you are really frustrated and you don't feel listened to and you don't feel heard and you feel like every time it happens, I just talk over you again and then I do it again and again, and it makes you so angry that you just want to smack me and you just want me to stop it. Is that right?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Now notice, folks, does she look a little de-escalated? Okay, she is. It's undeniable. If I then do the next move, okay, Vicky, if I felt like someone I cared about was not listening to me, was not taking in what I was saying, was not paying attention, and not only they were doing that, but they were talking over me and they were doing it over and over again, I'd want to smack them too. And you know what? I'd feel angry and I'd feel hurt. I'd feel really hurt and disrespected. Is that how you feel?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I not only feel hurt and disrespected, I feel disappointed.
Yeah.
I expected more.
Yeah. Okay. Now, folks, did you hear how her voice tone changed after I acknowledged her emotion? Do you all hear that? Totally different. Okay. Beautiful. All right.
Can I do
So,
a quick aside?
what's that?
Can I do a quick aside?
You can do a quick aside.
Okay. I literally felt my body heat up
Yeah.
when I was yelling at you. And as you were doing that, I could feel my temperature dropping. That's my
Yeah.
side.
Yeah. 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 I would say anyone, Vicky, who felt like someone they cared about not only wasn't listening, not only wasn't paying attention, was talking over them and doing it again and again and again, anyone would want to smack them, and anyone would be frustrated and hurt and angry. And I'm curious, what would make this feel resolved for you?
That it didn't happen again.
Okay. All right. I
That
hear you.
that it didn't happen again.
Yeah. I'm really glad you told me.
Me
And now
too.
yeah. And now when you talk, I'm going to pay attention and make sure I button my mouth up. because I do care about you. Okay, good. Thank you, Vicky. I
You're
appreciate
welcome.
it. All right, let me go and remove the pin. So folks, what we're doing here with lava is the first thing we want to do is we're listening. Okay, we're listening and you let them get it out. Okay, remember, it's not about you. Don't make it about you. Don't make it mean anything about you at all. This is about their experience. And I want to point out something. Notice I did not agree with Vicky. I did not tell her that I was wrong and that she was right. At no point did I do that. If Vicky came at me and said, Robert, I know you're having the government do surveillance on me because every time we talk, I hear airplanes flying over the house. And when you call me on the phone, I hear static and I just know the government is surveilling me and you set it up. I could use the same technique and it would work great. I'd say, you know, Vicky, if I hear you correctly, you're very concerned because you feel the government is doing surveillance on you and that I am a part of it. And part of the evidence is when we talk, you hear airplanes flying over your house. And when we're on the phone, you hear static, which leads you to believe that they're listening in on our conversations. Is that correct? Because there's something profoundly powerful about a person feeling listened to and understood. And if you do that, you're going to feel the emotional energy in that conversation de-escalate. And it doesn't require that you say, I'm wrong, you're right. I didn't agree to change anything. I didn't agree to do anything different. Now, in Vicky's case, I just said, yeah, next time you talk, I'll listen, because that's probably what I would answer in real life. But in many of these circumstances, like if literally my friend was paranoid, and I used to work with the chronically mentally ill. So folks, that was a real conversation that I had had 20 something years ago. I know the government's surveilling me, Robert, and you're doing it. And the way that conversation ended is, you know, I'm really glad you told me that and that you feel comfortable enough to be honest with me about your fears. And you know what? I know a really good therapist who I think could help us make sense of this. Would you like to go talk to them with me? And then I brought the person to someone qualified to handle that. But did I admit any wrong? No, because I didn't do anything wrong. Okay. So what we do, folks, is you listen and then you let them finish and then you feedback and you check. Now, if I'd done the feedback and said, is that right? And she said, no, that's not right. Then I would have said, good, I'm glad I asked. Please tell me again, and then let her go through it again. I don't move on to the next step until she goes, yes, that's right. And the minute she goes, yes, that's right, it de-escalates. Okay. Step two, and so this is an example of it. If I hear you correctly, you're concerned about manufacturing. So this would be like in a manufacturing situation. You won't be able to make the deadline promised to the customer. Is that right? And again, you check. All right. Then what we want to do is acknowledge the emotion. Reflect how you would feel in the same situation, looking at it from the same perspective. Again, what we're doing here is we're acknowledging the emotion of their experience. Saying, if I was looking at the world the way that you're looking at the world, I probably would have felt the same way. This allows them to save face. Okay? So in this example, we might reflect on how we might say, if I promised the customer a deadline I thought we could easily deliver on, and then my team said they couldn't, I'd be really frustrated about that. Is that how you feel? And the salesperson might go, yeah, I'm really frustrated. Okay? And then what we want to do is validate their experience from their perspective, not the complaint. I never told Vicky I wasn't listening to her. And I never told her that I, had anything to do with government surveillance. I didn't do any of those things, and I didn't need to de-escalate the situation. But we want to validate the experience from their perspective. And an example of that would be anyone in your position probably would have felt frustrated by that. I can imagine that. You're a salesperson, you're out there, you're trying to do your job. You're trying to give them accurate data on what the company can do and what the company can't do. And if I was in your shoes, I'd be affected about my reputation as well when I'm making promises to customers. And then I have to go back and tell the customers I can't deliver on those promises. I'd be worried about how that affects the company. I'd be worried about how that affects me. Is that how you feel? Probably say, yeah. Okay. And then we ask forward. We can transition to a constructive, problem solving situation. So you might say something like, what would make this resolved for you? Okay, that would be one example of what you could do. What would help this to feel resolved for you? Or I'm really glad you told me. And now that I know that this is a concern of yours, how about we have this agreement moving forward? A lot of time in interpersonal relationships, the issue is unclear agreements about how we're going to handle certain situations. But what makes all this work, particularly the lava, is I don't get defensive and feel attacked when they're coming at me. That's the difference. Notice I'm not what I'm not doing. I'm not defending myself, right? I'm not doing that. I'm not defending myself. I'm not trying to get them to see it my way. I'm not doing any of that at all. Okay? All right. So let's move on to the final one here. And this is called the needs ladder. Okay? And the needs ladder is adapted from two things: nonviolent communication. How many people have read the book or heard of the book Nonviolent Communication? Yeah, a few of you? Okay, cool. And behavioral design science. BJ Fogg, he was a researcher at Stanford. I'm using him a lot for the book on habits. And he did a lot of studies on what it takes to get habits to really stick and work for human beings. So with the needs ladder, we've got behavior, we've got the feeling, we've got the need, and we've got the strategy. And these are basically the four things we want to look at. So with the behavior, we want to observe the behavior or the complaint. Similar to what we did with the lava technique. You know, the person comes to me and says, hey, I need more check-ins, or you've asked me for more check-ins lately. So let's say someone comes to me and says, hey, I need more check-ins, Robert. And I go, okay, well, you've asked for more check-ins lately. And what we're trying to do here is understand what's the real need beneath the surface level request. Okay. And here's what's interesting, folks. Has anyone here had the experience where someone comes at you and makes a request and it seems off? Like, has anyone ever had someone make a request and it felt like a power play, or it felt like a manipulation, or it felt like they were trying to act like the big person on campus or boss you around? Yeah, some people are saying yes. That's something that's really, really common, especially because we're emotional beings. Okay. And so a lot of times people will maybe they're trying to impress someone, maybe they're trying to impress their boss. I used to see this when I coach guys at Oracle a lot. Oftentimes the management, one manager would just absolutely torture his people, but that guy was trying to impress the people above them. And so, or in relationship, how many people have felt manipulated by their significant other? If you love me, you would do this. Those kinds of requests. Has anyone ever had one of those before? If you really love me, you would do this. If you cared about me, you would do this. So one of the things that we teach when we go into a lot more depth in influence is this difference between a surface level request and a deeper need. And the deeper needs that we have are all the same. They're not like unique. Like we have these things called personal needs, and you have all five of them, but one runs your life. So there's freedom, there's security, there's belonging, there's competency, and there's self-expressive. One of those is dominant in your life, and it will drive most of your decisions. But underneath every request everyone ever makes of you is a very similar set of what we call deeper needs. Everyone wants to be loved, right? Does anyone here not want to be loved? Right? Everyone wants to be appreciated. Everyone wants to feel respected, and everyone wants to feel understood, right? And everyone wants to feel accepted as they are. These are things that we all want. And so one of the things that I'll teach professionals to do is when you hear a surface level request, start to listen for what's the deeper need underneath that request. Because the deeper need is what's really important to that nervous system in that interaction. And if you understand that, folks, what that means as a superpower skill for you is that you can literally not give people what they're asking for, which sometimes you have to do, right? Sometimes we have to say no to people, particularly children. right? Children, loved ones, people at work. Sometimes we have to set boundaries. Sometimes we have to say no. But if you understand this concept of the difference between surface level requests and deeper needs, you can literally not give people what they're asking for, but satisfy the deeper need that was driving the request to begin with. And they will thank you and come back for more. And they'll do it time and time again. So let's say, for example, your boss comes in and says, you know, Eugenie, I need this report done, this weekend, get it on my desk Saturday afternoon, and I need it done, da, 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 da. And you're going, uh-oh. And that boss is, let's say, competency-based, which means they like to be smart, they like to be accomplished, they want to feel respected, they want to feel valued. Maybe they're trying to impress someone else in the company. But that's how that nervous system of that boss works. And you think to yourself, well, what's the deeper need underneath that? Significance. Person wants to feel respected. They want to feel appreciated. So what we might do, and this is one of the moves I would teach y'all, is we might go to that boss and say, hey, first off, I really appreciate the fact that you trust me with that report because I know it's important and I know it is a big deal, which is why we need it. And I know it's going to make a huge difference in the company. And I appreciate the fact that you entrusted me to do that. And here's the challenge that I'm having. I actually promised my daughter I'd fly to New York and help her move into her college this weekend. And so I'm not sure how I can do a good job on this and take care of that at the same time. I'm wondering, would it be okay to maybe get that report done and put on your desk by Monday? And if I show that person respect and reverence and deliver the request back to them that way, it now allows them to save face. And as that person who wants to be the hero and save the day, come in and say, you know what? Absolutely, that's fine. Monday will be fine. And I'll tell you, folks, a lot of the battles that we get into where we're clashing with personalities can be completely eliminated by having a very basic awareness of these persons' personalities and what makes them go green light and what makes them go red light, and knowing how to talk to them. So that's something that's underneath this technique. That's a higher level thing that we would teach, but it's really, when you know it, it makes communicating with people incredibly easy. And it makes it really easy to win over those hard to connect with people. And really, the people that are hard to connect with, the people that are just wired differently than you. They're counter to you. If you're high freedom and you're trying to connect with someone who's high security, it's like butting heads all the time. Because you just want to go for it and have fun, and they want to like go, whoa, what about this? What about that? And so it's just communication differences. Okay. So with the needs ladder, the first thing we want to do is, in this example, the person says, hey, I see that you've asked for more check-ins lately. And then what we want to do is address the feeling next. Identify what's the feeling behind that and check. So I might say to them, gosh, it sounds like you feel a bit uncertain or left out. Is that right? And so again, notice I'm using that same maneuver as I'm trying it on. I'm going, is this what's going on? Is this the feeling behind it? And then I'm checking. Because if I check, they go, no, that's not right. And go, okay, well, tell me, what are you feeling? So I'm always going to get the answer either way here. Okay. So I might say, it sounds like you're feeling a bit uncertain or left out. Is that right? They go, yeah, I am. And then I can take a look at the need, right? What is the underlying need there? Okay. And then check. So again, I'm trying it on, I'm guessing at the need, and then I'm checking. Is the need here more about clarity? Is it more about recognition or support? Is that right? And again, they may say, yeah, that's it. Or they might say, no, it's not that at all. Here's what I need is I need time off, or I need something else. But now I can figure out what that need is underneath it. Okay. And then that brings us to strategy. And now we can negotiate a strategy that works for both of us. Okay. Well, now that I know that you have a need to check in more regularly, sometimes when we're at certain events, I'm not able to check in with you. Because when I get with the women, I get whisked off to the other side of the room, and it feels really awkward, uncomfortable to leave that group to go back and check in with you. So I'm not sure what we can do about that, but now we can find a strategy that works for both of us. because often needs don't conflict, but strategies do. So I might say, hey, how can we meet that need in a way that works for both of us? So again, why does this work? Because conflicts are usually strategy clashes, not need clashes. And once needs like appreciation, respect, and understanding are named, collaboration increases. Why does this also work? It aligns with self-determination theory and attachment neuroscience. So those are your 3 techniques, folks. So I just want you to realize I'm giving you the scripts here, but there's behavioral moves behind all of these that also dramatically affect the outcome. And so when you start to stack these things together, it gives you an incredibly powerful communication skill set very, very quickly. But these scripts are basic enough that all of you can go and use them in these situations. One where you have to give feedback, right? So that would be the care one, right? The care feedback model. One where you're having to de-escalate someone who's upset and frustrated. That would be the lava technique. And then the needs ladder. Okay? And we're doing pretty good. We're coming in under the hour. So now, when you think about where all this stuff came from, folks, and this is kind of like, I just want you to know, and I'll kind of leave it with this. So for any of those who don't want to hear about the course, that's fine. But these are 3 of about 48 moves from a full playbook. And so there are strategies and scripts for how we handle people. And then there's also a lot of behavioral profiling that we do as well. There's a whole lot that's in this course. And just to give you an idea of some of the big things that we cover in it is the first one is how to read anyone in 60 seconds. What that means is when you read someone, you're looking at the person, and before you even have a conversation with them, you're guessing these are the 4 things they care about more than anything else that will always excite, entice, and inspire them to take action. And these are the 4 things that are probably going to cause them stress, pressure, and anxiety. So I got to be careful and tread lightly around those particular things. Okay. Let me give you a perspective of how, just an example of how important this is. Okay. If I've taught this to many real estate agents. Okay. Now, if a real estate agent is selling a house to a freedom person, someone who's primarily driven by freedom. They want to do what they want to do when they want to do it. They want to be free. They want to have options. They want to adventure. They want to have upside potential. Can you see how the way they would sell that person would be very different than if they're selling to someone who's primarily security driven? Someone who wants to feel safe. They want to feel secure. They want assurance. They want to know that things are going to be okay. They want to have their, I's dotted and their T's crossed. And these people want to avoid risk, chaos, and uncertainty. The real estate agent, if they can read the person on site, and I've got a security person, what am I going to talk about? What might I talk about with them that would be interesting to them? Do you think I might talk about how low the crime rate is in the neighborhood? Right? If they're security, I'm going to tell them about how this is an incredibly safe neighborhood, if that's true. It's got the lowest crime rate in a 30-mile radius. The schools are incredibly highly rated and very good. The builder is a solid builder. It's new home construction, so they don't have to worry about any kind of old building type problems. I might mention how all of the utilities are underground here, so even when we get the windy season, people don't lose power in this neighborhood, and how there's a fiber optic cable going through every house, so the internet's really strong and good. And all of the things that are going to give them, and it's a gated community, all the things that make them feel safe and secure. It's near hospitals. So it's only a 2-minute drive to get to the nearest ER room should you have an emergency. Can you see how this would really work for the security-based person, right? But if they're freedom, you think they care about that? No. If they're freedom, I want to tell them, you know what? This location, you're right by 280, you're right by 85, you're right by 101. You can get out, you can get to the city, you can get to the ocean 30 minutes either direction. You can be surfing in the afternoon, you can be doing wine tasting at night, and we're only 2 hours outside of Tahoe. This is one of the great reasons to live here in the Bay Area. You can go skiing on Friday, wine tasting on Saturday, and then you can go surfing on Sunday. Options, adventure, upside potential. But if they're self-expressive, I might talk to them about how this is the only Eichler community in Mid-Peninsula that's still intact. It's got the radiant floor heating. And Eichler was this very unique designer. For those of you who don't know him, he had a very artsy, unique style of home. And I might tell this person about all of the customizations that were done to this home that they're looking at, because if they're self-expressive, that's what they care about. So when I say you can read a person in 60 seconds, I really mean you can very quickly identify what they care about. And all you're doing, folks, is you're really making your communication so much more economical, because you're not going to waste your time talking about things that don't interest them and move them forward. And you're also not going to accidentally talk about things that are going to make them crash or get stuck. So I will show you how to validate it through conversation. We'll show you how to predict their behavior under pressure and when excited. Literally predict how people are making decisions. We'll show you how to prevent difficult conversations from even happening or becoming a problem. And when you have to have a difficult conversation, how to do it in a way that makes it feel a lot better, easier. If you're the type of person that gets stressed and anxious, it'll make it a lot less scary. It'll make it a lot less scary to have those difficult conversations. And it'll make it easier to navigate any interaction, because you know what to do next. I did several consulting gigs where I would go in and do psychographic profiling. And so if you learn this stuff, you could go out and do this. And basically what I would do is, I worked with a bank, and United American Bank, and they were struggling with commercial real estate loans. So I said, give me your top 5 customers in that department and let me interview your sales team, and I will show you where you match and where you mismatch. And so I was able to produce a report very quickly for the president of the bank and say, all right, with your team, don't do any training in these following 4 areas. Do what comes naturally. The only area to change is this one specific area. You need to do this thing here that's going to be counterintuitive. And I gave them about 3 different moves to do that were counterintuitive. I said, it's going to feel weird. You're not going to want to do it. You're going to think it's stupid. It is what your customers care about, and it's what they need to hear and they're not hearing. And that's why they're not converting. When they did that, they had a 300% increase that year. And the sales cycle was shorter, because they were no longer doing things that were actually distancing the sale from them. They stopped doing all those things, and they turned on the counterintuitive thing that was actually necessary. And I'll tell you, one of the big things is bankers are their competency and their security based. They like pennies and nickels and dimes and saving a cent here and a cent there. If they can get a better deal at 1% lower interest rate, they think that's the most amazing thing in the world. But a lot of entrepreneurs that they were selling to were what we call competency and freedom-based folks. So those people got annoyed with the bankers, because they don't care about saving a nickel and a dime. They care about acquiring the next real estate project. They care about expanding their business. They care about the thrill and the adventure of being a cowboy and going out and doing another deal. And so the bankers kept trying to sell them by focused on how they could save them 25 cents here and a nickel over here. And they were just frustrating these people. And they completely had a blind spot to things these people actually cared about. Because the president says, how are we going to sell more of these when we're a small bank against the big banks? And I said, man, if you understand the personalities, you know how to leverage that. I said, you call a big bank, what happens? You get an 800 number. It takes you a long time to get through to the bankers, to get the people you need to. I said, but your bank, I said, they can call their banker directly. They can give out their private cell phone. Do that. Then I said, can your admins help them fill out the paperwork? They said, yeah. I said, have them do that as well. And then we had to make a couple of other tweaks and focus on selling the freedom points. How going with United American was going to give them more freedom, more options, more adventure, more upside potential. And the minute they just adjusted their sales presentation, they started closing sales all day long. Why? Because that's the language that their customer understood. And they removed from their presentation the annoying fact that they could save them 0.5% interest if they did 10 pounds of paperwork, because those people didn't want to hear that. Huge increase. So I've taught many, many salespeople this stuff, and they get a huge increase very quickly, and they shorten their sales cycle, which is why this stuff is so awesome. Okay. I use it to help people do serious behavioral change. So I'm also using it to help people talk themselves out of unwanted habits, smoking, or to do weight loss, or to, maybe drink less, or to change their other behaviors that they want by understanding how their personality works, because it flows like a river and it moves in one direction. When you work with it, things are easy. When you fight it, you're swimming upstream.